In this world, humans coexist alongside the realms of gods, including the Water Kingdom, the Heavenly Kingdom, and the Earth Kingdom. All three celestial realms are destined to rule the three worlds. Among them, the Water Kingdom was granted the highest authority by the Emperor of the Divine Realm. They only need to gather the 3 divine stones to ascend to the throne. However, the 3 jade seals are currently in the human world, prompting them to come here and retrieve them. In the Water Kingdom, the Grand Shaman, a wise sorcerer of the realm, has witnessed the appearance of red water. This signifies the imminent arrival of a new emperor in the Divine Realm. Therefore, he immediately seeks out Habik, the Great Lord, and gives him a map leading to the location of the Divine Stone. Habik is instructed by the Grand Shaman to return promptly, as the red water will appear 7 times before they can perform the coronation ceremony. Before embarking on his journey, the Grand Shaman informs Habik that a servant has been arranged in the human world, but Habik declines and opts to travel with Nam Su Rai. Meanwhile, in the human world, a woman named So-Ah works as a psychologist. However, her career struggles have plunged her into debt. Feeling dejected, she and her assistant decide to unwind with a few drinks. Her assistant encourages So-Ah to find a wealthy gentleman to settle down with. This remark pricks So-Ah's pride, prompting her to boast about receiving a diamond ring from a rich young man. After the meal, she heads to the tree where she buried the precious ring and digs it up. This ring will help her pay off some of her debts and pursue her dream of traveling to another country. A shooting star appears, and So-Ah wishes for good fortune. However, instead of good fortune, she encounters trouble. The shooting star is actually Habik, and he falls and hits So-Ah's head, causing her to faint. Upon arriving in the human world, Habik has lost his clothes and borrows So-Ah's work clothes before leaving. Awakening, So-Ah frantically searches for her ring but finds it missing. Infuriated, she blames a thief for taking it. Habik, meanwhile, has found Nam Su Rai. Seeing Su Rai's fine clothes, Habik forces him to trade. However, they realize their divine powers have vanished. Additionally, water gods are obligated to complete their mission before returning to the human world. In a state of confusion, his subordinate searches for replacement clothes. By chance, So-Ah passes by, leading to an encounter between her and Habik. He explains that he merely borrowed her clothes and will return them soon, along with a gift of her choosing. Unknowing of his true identity as the water god, So-Ah assumes Habik has amnesia. She tries to leave, but Habik holds her hand to stop her. At that moment, So-Ah's assistant arrives, mistaking Habik for a crazed pervert and berating him. This infuriates Habik, causing him to declare that he is the future king of the 3 realms. Now, So-Ah and her assistant believe Habik is truly insane. They shove a postcard into his hand and leave. Later, Su Rai, the servant, returns and informs Habik that he has found a place to stay. He then leads Habik to the location. The scene shifts to So-Ah. After returning home, she considers the day a grueling one, filled with troubles ranging from patience to the loss of her valuable ring. Therefore, the loan she needs to repay now becomes a major concern for So-Ah. The next day, So-Ah went to the bank to check her interest rate and see if she could extend her loan payment deadline. However, she was unsuccessful and was shocked to learn that her interest rate had increased to 7%. She tried to reason with them, explaining that she was facing temporary difficulties and needed a reasonable interest rate. The bank employee told her to wait while they sought approval, but after waiting half a day, she received no response. As she sat there, dejected and waiting, a man entered the bank and was greeted with great warmth, much to her surprise. When she overheard that this man only had to pay 1% interest on his loan, So-Ah felt a sense of discrimination. She marched into the office to confront the employee about why she had to pay such a high interest rate. This caught the man's attention, and he found himself drawn to her. Meanwhile, outside, her assistant was arguing with the driver of the man who entered the bank earlier, as the driver had used his business card to wipe bird droppings off his car. So-Ah tried to intervene and ignore the incident, but her assistant was too stubborn and pulled the windshield wiper with such force that it broke. They had gone from being the victims to the perpetrators. Their bad luck seemed to know no bounds. Money was a pressing issue that needed immediate attention, so So-Ah decided to visit a real estate broker to sell the land her ancestors had left her. But the broker informed her that the land was barren, a dog-eat-stone, chicken-eat-gravel kind of place, and nobody would be interested in buying it. At that moment, Habik and Surai were standing on that very land, trying to figure out how to open the divine portal to return home. Just as So-Ah arrived to check out her ancestral land, she saw the two men and recognized them as the crazy ones she'd encountered the day before. She quickly turned to leave. Surai, however, took it upon himself to run into the front of her car to stage a fake accident and get a ride. With no other options, So-Ah reluctantly agreed to give them a lift. But the map in her car was damaged, causing them to take a wrong turn and end up on top of a mountain. Moreover, their detour exhausted their gas supply. The phone signal was also unavailable, leaving her helpless. For the first time, Habik demonstrated his abilities by sending Surai to buy gas so So-Ah could rest. However, Surai never returned. The two of them set out to find him. Suddenly, So-Ah and Habik encountered a wild boar. They frantically ran towards the car, but dropped the keys. Thankfully, So-Ah quickly thought of hiding them both in the trunk, where they prayed for the boar to leave. Luckily, Surai returned with a hunter, and they were rescued and transported back to the city. Before So-Ah left, Habik mentioned that her ancestors had made a pact with the gods, meaning that generations after her would be obligated to serve him. So-Ah found this ridiculous and walked away. Habik, however, stepped forward and kissed her. Surai quickly dragged the god away, explaining that he couldn't just kiss a mortal woman like that without facing consequences. Back home, So-Ah couldn't understand why. When Habik kissed her, she had closed her eyes as if she were starved for affection. Even the next morning, she woke up still haunted by the kiss, replaying it in her mind over and over again. Surai and Habik were now observing the world with wide eyes. Surai, having interacted with humans before, was able to share some knowledge about the world with his master. They happened upon a skateboarding competition, and this was Habik's first time seeing the sport. The participants were showcasing impressive skills, and the competition was awarding prizes to the best skateboarder. The winner would receive money for food, so Surai begged Habik to try it. To everyone's astonishment, Habik participated and rode on the water like a wave, leaving the crowd in awe. So-Ah happened to be out for a walk and saw Habik skateboarding. She couldn't believe that a man who seemed half mad could skate so well. Upon spotting her, Habik chased after her to discuss the matter of serving him. For some unknown reason, So-Ah ran away, even though she hadn't done anything wrong, with Habik persistently pursuing her. She hid in the aerobics class to escape him. Even after it was over, she couldn't understand why she ran. Meanwhile, Habik couldn't find So-Ah and didn't win any prize. The reason was that his skills were indistinguishable from those of a professional, and this was just an amateur competition. Surai was left with a grumbling stomach. Determined to find her, he decided to follow the business card So-Ah had given him. He hailed a taxi, but believing himself to be a king who could do whatever he wanted, he demanded to drive. As a result, he was kicked out of the taxi and had to take another one. As they approached So-Ah's apartment, they saw her rushing somewhere. But as she helped an elderly man cross the street, she purposely used her phone to slow down, which caught Habik's attention. Seeing the two men, So-Ah felt like they were following her and became annoyed. Worse, Habik demanded that she provide him with shelter and food so he could quickly find the divine stone. Unable to bear it any longer, So-Ah pulled Surai aside, assuming he was Habik's friend, and suggested that he take Habik to a psychiatric hospital because she believed he was severely mentally ill. The two men ended up wandering into a Chocopie restaurant. A man in the restaurant saw them and was so shocked he dropped his spoon. As the two were searching for a way out of their predicament, the man ran over to them and, with a bold move, kissed Habik. He recognized that Habik had lost his divine powers and chuckled maliciously, declaring that Habik was about to face a great calamity. Surai realized that this was the beggar god of the Water Kingdom, whom Habik had banished years ago. Meanwhile, because of the increased deposit for her clinic's lease, So-Ah went to speak with the building manager. But she was met with a shake of the head. Determined, she went directly to the chairman's office to plead her case. By chance, she ran into Hu Yi there. She explained her financial difficulties, but the old man refused to listen, declaring that if she didn't pay, he would rent the space to someone else. He then continued his business meeting with director Hu Yi. Frustrated, Hu Yi left in a fit of anger. As she stepped outside, So-ah was startled by a voice emanating from a nearby tree. Unsure if she had heard correctly, she turned around just in time to see Director Hu-yi walking out. He said that he didn't want to press charges over the windshield wiper incident, so she didn't need to pay for damages. Then he left. This made So-ah feel embarrassed, as she had been loud every time she'd met him. Just then, her assistant called to inform her that one of her patients had run away. So-ah had to put everything else aside and go find him. Meanwhile, Habik and Su-rai were on the subway. Habik had started to feel hungry since the beggar god kissed him. By chance, he saw Mora's god on his phone and followed the person holding the phone out of the train. As a result, he was left behind on the subway, separated from Su-rai. He was clueless about what to do, but as fate would have it, Habik ran into So-ah's patient. The patient was a bit out of it, but he bought Habik a lot of food. They started talking. Coincidentally, So-ah was looking for her patient and saw him taking a photo with Habik by the Han River. She hurried over. So-ah's eyes widened at the sight of the two talking, as if she were about to faint. The conversation between them seemed to be full of disagreements, and the patient, in a fit of rage, started going crazy. So-ah quickly approached to calm him down, but was met with a threat that he would jump into the river. So-ah had no choice but to stay put. Furthermore, the trauma of her suicide attempt by jumping into the river years ago was still haunting her, making her feel breathless. She begged Habik to help. The crazy man who stepped on the nail saw So-ah struggling to breathe and, in a fit of self-pity, thought she was criticizing him, so he jumped into the river to cool off. Seeing this, Habik felt sorry for her and told So-ah to watch over the chicken leg for him. Then, he jumped in to save the patient. When the patient was safe, So-ah finally breathed a sigh of relief. She ran over to check on him and then embraced Habik, thanking him. After the patient was loaded into an ambulance, So-ah realized that Habik had been around for several days. She said she wanted to take him to the social welfare organization, but Habik declined. He only needed shelter from her and her obedience. Of course, So-ah refused and said goodbye to Habik. But as she walked away, she heard voices saying that she was ungrateful and disloyal, leaving her confused about what was happening to her. Back at home, despite being a psychologist, she called her close friend, who was also a doctor, to ask about her condition. After listening to her explanation, her friend said it could be a case of obsessive-compulsive disorder. All she needed was rest, and she would be fine. This reassured So-ah. Meanwhile, Habik told Su-rai about seeing Mora on the phone. Su-rai looked at Habik with a puzzled expression, not knowing how to see her anymore. Just then, the phone's owner came out demanding it back. They went to a phone shop to check it out, but they couldn't do anything because they had no money. They came empty-handed and left empty-handed. Back at their lodgings, Su-rai wanted to earn money, so he went out to get a part-time job. Before leaving, he didn't forget to give his master some snacks and a bottle of water to hold him over. However, Habik's pride almost made him throw the snacks away. At that moment, Habik's empty stomach growled, and he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed a snack and started eating. His eyes widened in surprise, as he didn't expect snacks in the human world to be so delicious, like delicacies from the heavens. In the days that followed, he ate so heartily that the beggar in the area didn't even dare to ask for a share, as he was too worried about his own hunger. As for So-ah, the incessant chattering in her head had kept her up at night. Convinced that she needed peace of mind, she went to see Habik. She suggested that he see the psychologist she knew to get treatment for his condition, to talk things out and release his burden. As she was leaving, Habik stopped her. He said that what he wanted was for her to be his servant, and then he warned her that if she refused, misfortune would follow her. This gave So-ah a lot to think about. The constant chatter of the trees in her ears was driving her crazy. To help her, So-ah's assistant gave her a card for a reunion with her old classmates, saying she could release her stress and seek support there. But So-ah was annoyed and didn't want to go. The scene shifted to Su-rai, who was out on his bike, working a part-time job. He saw some large, glittering golden patches and led Habik to see them. It turned out to be the golden-tinted glass of a building. By chance, Habik saw Mora on a projection screen there, but when Su-rai turned to look, he couldn't see anything anymore. That evening, So-ah was on her way to her old school reunion. It was strange that she had been so grumpy in the afternoon but was now attending a party. Women are so difficult to understand. As fate would have it, Director Huyi passed by and, seeing So-ah on foot, invited her to ride with him. He was also an alumnus of the school, but he was in a higher class, so he was also going to the party. But, as usual, So-ah declined. At the same time, Ha-beek went looking for So-ah, but he heard that she was at a party. He immediately took a taxi with Su-rai and went there. At the party, So-ah arrived, but because she didn't stand out, no one paid much attention to her, while Hu-yi, because of his success, was surrounded by women wanting to get to know him. To add insult to injury, So-ah was teased by an old friend about her business struggles. But at that moment, Hu-yi came over to greet her. This made her two friends see her in a different light. They thought she was secretly wealthy because she knew Director Yi. As So-ah escaped one ordeal, another came her way. Ya-ya, her rival from school, arrived. Seeing So-ah there, Ya-ya immediately started gossiping, as she was a person of influence. The bouquet of flowers in Ya-ya's hand mimicked Ya-ya's words, and So-ah couldn't hold back anymore. She grabbed the bouquet and tore it apart. Next, she sang Ya-ya a song to let her know what it was like to be insulted, and she also told Ya-ya to stop slurring her words. Enraged, Ya-ya was about to chase after her, but Ha-beek stopped her. He asked Ya-ya why she kept bothering his woman. If she wanted to say something, she would have to step over him first. After Ya-ya left, seeing that So-ah's shirt was torn, Ha-beek took off his jacket and put it around her. They got in the car and headed back to Ha-beek's place. So-ah didn't want to bother anyone, so she tried to return his jacket and leave, but Ha-beek said he'd helped her so many times already that she owed him one. He then led her to a phone store. It turned out that they were there to ask So-ah to buy a phone for him. Then, he told her that he had seen Mora on the phone, so he wanted to find her. As they were walking, Ma appeared on an electronic billboard across the river. Ha-beek pointed it out to So-ah. Realizing that it was the famous actress, So-ah was a little surprised. Sitting there, Ha-beek said that he wanted to meet Mora, so he asked So-ah to take him there. So-ah said it would be difficult for her to meet a celebrity, and even more difficult to meet her alone. But the next day, her conscience pricked her, so she decided to take Ha-beek there. She told him to wait downstairs while Ha-beek went to find Mora. When he found her on the rooftop, he was overjoyed to see his goddess, but he was stopped by her bodyguards, who wanted to send him away. Being a god and still being chased away, Ha-beek stood his ground against the bodyguards. Just then, So-ah ran up and tried to intervene, but she was pushed over. Mora, seeing him close to another woman, slapped Ha-beek, as if she knew who he was. So-ah, seeing this, stood with Ha-beek, refusing to accept it. She said that no matter how beautiful Mora was, she would lose all her value after acting. She then grabbed Ha-beek and left. Mora stayed there and called the wind god to tell him that Ha-beek had appeared. Hearing this, the wind god, who was preparing to skydive, was quite surprised and added that Ha-beek had lost the map, so they needed to hide the divine stone. The scene shifted to So-ah, who had taken Ha-beek to her fortune-teller friend. When her friend was reading Ha-beek's fortune, he started saying strange things that baffled her. After a while, her friend told So-ah to find a professional psychologist because this case was too much for her. After hanging up, as So-ah stepped outside, she was grabbed by a masked man and dragged to the rooftop. He began to try to push her over the edge. Su-rai, standing below, saw everything and called Ha-beek. Just as Ha-beek turned around, he saw So-ah falling. He quickly dropped his phone, ran through a glass window, and his body transformed into a cool dragon, wrapping around So-ah and bringing her down safely, much to her astonishment. Thinking she was dreaming because of her fear, she fainted. Su-rai screamed in delight because his master's divine powers had returned. But by evening, they seemed to have disappeared again. Su-rai tried to make Ha-beek turn the stone into gold, but he couldn't do it anymore. So-ah woke up. She thought it was all a dream, so when she saw herself in Ha-beek's living space, she ran away, thinking that her auditory hallucinations were now turning into visual hallucinations. As she wandered down the street, she recalled the scene of Ha-beek saving her, and she thought that those images were caused by her sins. She didn't believe that gods and spirits existed. At that moment, she remembered the man who had pushed her down the day before. So-ah could sense that the man was near her, and she was terrified. She ran while looking back. but it turned out to be just Habik and Su-rai. The two of them wanted to sleep over, but So-ah didn't seem too happy about it. So, Su-rai went ahead and pushed Habik inside, telling So-ah that a god had entered her home, so she was obligated to welcome him. That's how Habik and Su-rai ended up inside. Standing in the house, Habik happened to notice a man constantly lurking near So-ah's home. Even the next morning when they woke up, they saw him around. So, Habik told So-ah to be careful. She took the two of them out to buy clothes, but after trying on designer clothes and seeing the prices, they headed to a street vendor instead. Habik wasn't happy because it wasn't designer, so he didn't want the shopkeeper to know. He said that as long as your body was beautiful, you could wear nothing and still look good. Only when he heard those words did Habik feel content to go shopping. After they were done, the three of them went to eat bun noodles. But as they were about to leave, Habik noticed the strange man returning to So-ah's house. She received rare good news. The buyer for her ancestral land was none other than Director Hui's company. She thought about it for a long time, still feeling bitter towards the director, so she made an appointment to discuss the price with him. Sitting there, feeling in control, she wanted to increase the price fivefold. This left Hui a bit stunned, as he had really only come to meet her, and the negotiations would be handled by someone else. After the negotiations were complete, So-ah went back home and waited for news. A few days later, she received an extremely good offer for the purchase of the land. It was probably the best news she had received in a while. Overjoyed, So-ah and her assistant went out for a meal together, as her dream of living abroad was about to become a reality. They went out for drinks and then sang karaoke, letting loose. Meanwhile, at home, Habik, thinking about the suspicious man, was worried about So-ah, so he waited for her downstairs. After drinking and singing, So-ah was walking down the alley towards her home. But the flickering lights in the alley were dim, making her afraid. She picked up a rock for protection. After running for a while, she saw a man. Upon closer inspection, she realized it was Habik, waiting for her to go inside. So-ah said she had some good news and wanted to take the two of them out to play tomorrow to have fun. It might be a farewell trip before she left. The next day, the three of them went out to play in a lush green field. Their feelings for each other grew closer. Before they entered the field, Habik had seen a mysterious man pouring water into So-ah's car engine. He then turned around to look around and fiddled with something on the engine. He didn't stop there. He also loosened the bolts on the tire jack. Was he trying to cause So-ah to die in a car accident? But Habik had seen it, and the nearby camera had caught everything, so he came up with a plan to catch the man. They finished playing and got back in the car to go home. At that moment, Habik remembered that he could regain his divine power when So-ah was in danger. But after So-ah was safe, his power disappeared. Habik quickly said he wanted to drive, but So-ah knew he didn't have a driver's license, so she refused. As the three of them left, the mysterious man looked overjoyed. On the road, the speed limit was 70 kilometers per h, but Habik was going 100 kilometers per h. He was trying to regain his powers, but he didn't realize that So-ah was sitting in the back seat, terrified and unable to speak. He ran every red light. So-ah could no longer take it and told Habik to slow down. He listened to her and hit the brakes to slow down, but he discovered that the brakes were broken. He drove into a dark tunnel, causing Su-rai to grab the handle in fear. Habik was about to use his powers to stop the car, but he tried repeatedly to no avail. He looked back and saw that So-ah was crying in fear. The car was speeding up, and the tunnel ahead was blocked. Habik quickly opened the sunroof, then told Su-rai to hold the steering wheel for him. He bravely climbed out of the car, stood on the roof, and reached out his hand to call to So-ah. She was standing with him on the rooftop, seeing the danger ahead, and had no choice but to trust Habik and climb up with him. The two of them stood on the roof while he tried to regain his powers, and the car continued to approach danger. Habik reminded Su-rai, "When the time comes, save yourself and jump out of the car." At the most dangerous moment, Habik regained his power, and they were able to stop in time. Su-rai was also safe and escaped. Habik then revealed that he had seen someone trying to harm her, but he wanted the law to help them, so he had to do this. Everything was safe for now, so they called the police, and they quickly found the perpetrator. The culprit was the man who had hit So-ah's car from behind earlier. It had been a long time since that happened, so when he turned around, she recognized him. The police said that he had once had a perfect life based on perfectionism. So, the fact that he and So-ah had collided years ago had made his life less perfect. It wasn't a big deal, but for someone who loved perfectionism like him, he would hold a grudge against So-ah. So, he had tried to harm her twice. The man who had pushed So-ah from the rooftop earlier was also him. This made So-ah feel a little guilty, knowing that this event had turned an ordinary man into someone like that. Back home, because of his great kindness in saving So-ah, his words carried more weight with her. He sat in a tub of water to soak, and said he was tired and wanted to eat something delicious. Since he was her savior, So-ah went to the supermarket to buy some groceries and then waited for Master Sep, but it turned out to be a faulty version. After cooking for a while, the three of them ended up eating instant noodles. This did not please Habik at all. It seemed like anything was possible with him. Because he could learn anything by just looking at it once, Habik very quickly learned to cook a safe meal in the kitchen. The food, lit by candlelight, together with a delicious spread, made Su-rai, the servant, very happy. Habik even carefully cut the steak for So-ah, leaving her speechless for 5 seconds in emotion. The three of them had a delicious dinner together, filled with joy. At the same time, Byryom, the wind god, returned to South Korea. He met with Mora, the goddess, and talked about their plan to stall for time and delay giving the divine stone to Habik. After that, he called Su-rai and told them to meet him right away to discuss things. The two of them, in order to get the divine stone, got in the car and left. At that moment, So-ah came out of the house, saying she wanted to go too. But when Byryom opened the door, So-ah was stunned to see that he was her classmate from high school and fainted. Inside, Byryom said that he couldn't give the divine stone to Habik until he got it back from Mora. This made Habik furious, as he was being obstructed, but because he had lost his divine power, he had no choice but to swallow his pride and leave. He also had to carry this debt back home. When So-ah woke up, she remembered what had happened earlier and smiled, thinking it was just a dream. But when she went downstairs and met Habik, he said that the ring Byryom had given her wasn't a love ring, but a friendship ring. He also said that 20 people in their class had received that ring, so from the beginning, it was just So-ah who had imagined herself being proposed to. Remembering that Bayam knew he had lost his divine power made Habik angry. He made a date with Mora to ask her why she had said that. Mora said it was an unavoidable situation. Putting that aside, Habik said he wanted the divine stone she possessed. But Mora refused and said that if he wanted it, he would have to see Byryom. She then left. He had no idea they were in cahoots with each other. The scene shifted to So-ah, who was at her office when Director Hui called to discuss the contract. They made a date to meet at the cafe near So-ah's work, but as they were going outside, they ran into Byryom. He dragged her into his car. Just as Habik saw this, he rushed after them, but he was too late. Byryom took So-ah to a bridge and showed her his power to control the weather. Then, he gave So-ah a potion and said he wanted her to make Habik crazy. If she could do that, he would grant her a wish. But So-ah felt that it was a vile thing to do and immediately threw the potion to the ground and stomped on it. Habik was being taken by Mora to find So-ah. When they got there, he called to her, and Byryom used his magic to pull So-ah towards him. He then created a crack around So-ah, making her scared and cry. Byryom said that Habik should awaken his divine power before he made So-ah fall. Angered, Habik said that he knew they had lost the divine stone. That's why they were dragging this out until today. This surprised Byryom, and he stopped what he was doing to So-ah. Tired, So-ah went to Byryom, not caring if he was a god or a man, and slapped him. She then looked at Habik with anger, then got in Mora's car and drove away. There, Habik angrily told them that he would deal with the missing divine stone later and left, returning to his lodgings. Mora and Byryom didn't understand why Habik knew about it. At that moment, they laughed and said they remembered 2,000 years ago when they had been entrusted with a firefly to look after. When Habik wanted to retrieve it, they had lost it, and using the same method, they had lied to him. That's why Habik knew them so well and realized what they had done. Mora angrily scolded Byryom, knowing that they had used the same old trick. Byryom didn't care much, as he was from the heavenly kingdom, so it wasn't anything to worry about to annoy the water god a little. Meanwhile, Habik was still at home waiting for So-Ah to come back. It was getting dark, and she hadn't returned, making him worried. So-Ah was feeling down, so she went to her mother's grave. Sitting there, she confided all the frustrations she had been experiencing lately. But now, she couldn't hear her mother's comforting words anymore. After sharing her innermost thoughts, So-Ah said goodbye to her mother and left. As she reached the gate, she saw Habik standing there, waiting for her. But the two of them looked at each other, not knowing what to say about what had happened that morning. Only when So-Ah stepped through the gate did Habik grab her hand and say that he promised her that from now on, he would never let her be in danger because of their affairs. He would protect her from now on, as it was his responsibility. Hearing Habik's sincere words, So-Ah's emotional wounds were almost healed. He held So-Ah's hand, and they pinky swore. But what Habik always kept hidden about So-Ah's ancestors was that 1200 years ago, they had committed the crime of betraying the water god and begged for his forgiveness. So, Habik's mother had punished So-Ah's family line to serve the gods from generation to generation. Moreover, each generation could only have one child. Once the child was born, the mother or father would die. That was also the explanation for why So-Ah's mother had died so young. However, Habik didn't plan to tell So-Ah about this. The next day, Habik was soaking in the tub, relaxing, when So-Ah went to see him and ask about Mora's address. She wanted to return the car she had driven yesterday, but Habik said he didn't have a car to drive, so he had asked Mora to transfer the car to him. But because he didn't have a driver's license, he had transferred the title to her. This made So-Ah happy, as she could now drive this cool car to work. When she was taken to the office, her assistant reminded her that she hadn't been to her meeting with Director Hu Yi yesterday, so he had called and come to find her several times. Remembering this, So-Ah quickly picked up the phone and called Hu Yi. He answered and walked in. There, he gently comforted So-Ah, saying that he wasn't in a hurry and that he was relieved that she was okay. This made So-Ah feel at ease. It felt like Director Hu Yi was a bit mysterious. So-Ah told him to reschedule the meeting for later that day or tomorrow, as she had forgotten about the contract and Byriom was still in her car. At the same time, Habik was confronting the other two about losing the Divine Stone. This went back 13 years. At that time, Mora and Byriom were fighting when they accidentally dropped the Divine Stone. They were urgently looking for the two stones when they realized they had lost one, as Judong was the one who went to find the other. Habik reprimanded them. "How could you be so irresponsible?" Byriom wasn't having it and retorted. "Didn't you lose your map when you descended to the mortal world?" Habik could only remain silent. Back to So-Ah, she was about to sell the divine land, but she didn't know that if the land was sold, humanity would be in danger. At that moment, Habik called her to pick him up. He said he wanted her to take him to the place where he had first come to the mortal world to find his map. When they arrived, So-Ah sat and waited for Habik to look for it, bored, and she took out her phone to record Habik, but he caught her. Embarrassed, she quickly made up an excuse that she was taking a picture, so the two of them took a few selfies together. But the only thing he couldn't do was take pictures. After hundreds of photos together, none of them turned out well. But despite that, they still smiled brightly when they looked at the pictures. As they walked, they chatted. Habik said that after he got the 3 divine stones, he would return, because if he wasn't in the Water Kingdom, everything would be in chaos. Back home, the 3 of them were about to have dinner when So-Ah received a call from her best friend. She said that they should come over because she had something to tell them. After dinner, the 3 of them went to see So-Ah's friend, who dragged her aside. Her best friend said that she had met a fortune teller who was very accurate. He was probably the god from the legend. Then, she pulled So-Ah into the medium's house and introduced So-Ah's situation to the person inside the curtain. The person inside the curtain told So-Ah about her home situation accurately, which surprised her. So-Ah believed what he said. But when he said that there was a fake god in her house and that she should get rid of him, she thought something was wrong. Habik, who had heard this outside, went in, planning to deal with this fake fortune teller. But oh my goodness, the person behind the curtain turned out to be the beggar god who had kissed Habik earlier. He begged Habik to spare his life, but when they weren't paying attention, he pushed So-Ah and ran away. Habik tried to chase after him, but he couldn't catch him, which angered him. At that moment, his stomach started growling again because he was hungry. It was understandable, as he had burned a lot of calories. After that, the three of them went to a restaurant for dinner. You have to eat to live, right? When they were done, the three of them got in the car, and So-ah wanted to go to Byriom's place to get the contract to sell the land. Ha-beek, sitting in the back seat, gave it to her because he had taken it back yesterday. But the contract was torn to shreds, as he had read it and found out she wanted to sell her ancestral land, so he had torn it up. Ha-beek said that So-ah could sell anything, except for that divine land. This made So-ah feel frustrated, as she couldn't do anything with her own land, so she got out of the car and left. As she was crossing the street, a large car was speeding towards her. But because she was so surprised, So-ah couldn't avoid it, and the car zoomed past. Ha-beek saw this and was in a panic, not knowing what happened to So-ah, so he ran over. He saw Brahm holding So-ah on the other side of the street. He said that he had nothing to do today, so he wanted to follow her. They were lucky that it was the right day, so they saved So-ah's life. Despite this, she was still furious and took a taxi to meet director Hu-yi. There, she wanted to finalize the sale of the land with his company. They said that it had been approved, but they still needed to conceal it from the company, and then it would be complete. Hearing this, So-ah agreed and was about to leave. Hu-yi then invited her to help him clean up and plant trees, with a certain allure. She agreed, chatting and cleaning up, planting trees with Hu-yi. So-ah sensed that the director was a good man, not cold and distant like she had felt before. They chatted, and before they knew it, it was evening. The director drove So-ah home, and he didn't forget to tell her that his farm was always welcoming to her. She apologized to him for her outbursts earlier and went inside. Like always, Ha-beek was waiting for her downstairs, worried. But this time, they didn't say anything to each other, just silently went inside. The next day, Ha-beek and Mora went to the Divine Gate, which was So-ah's ancestral land. They were there to investigate why the Divine Stone had gone missing that year. Looking around carefully, Ha-beek couldn't believe that they had found a stone with blood on it. Mora held it in her hand, and with the intuition of a goddess, she knew that it was human blood. But everything that belonged to humans would be purified by the land there, so the presence of blood there was truly impossible. They guessed that the blood must be related to a god, but gods never bleed, so they needed to find out the truth. The next day, Mora and Byriom went to find the beggar god. He was eating and drinking with some lesser gods in a house. When they saw Byriom, they all ran away, except for the beggar god, who was left behind. He started to panic and babble, so Mora yelled at him to shut his mouth. Byriom just stood there and laughed, watching them talk like a comedy act. They took him to see Ha-beek. Seeing the great lord, the beggar god was terrified, thinking that today was his annual memorial day. He brought out the stone with blood on it and said he found it in the divine land. This surprised the beggar god, as that was hardly possible. Ha-beek said that was why they needed to find out from him and wanted to know under what circumstances that could be possible. Holding the stone, the beggar god suddenly remembered. If that was possible, only one person in the divine realm could have done that. It seemed that after this hint, Ha-beek realized who it was. The scene then shifted to the three of them eating. Hu-yi arrived as Mora's business partner, as she was modeling for his hotel in the real world. But Ha-beek didn't care and greeted him. At that moment, So-ah also appeared there. This made Ha-beek angry, and he went over to her. But what he said made Hu-yi look surprised. He whispered to Hu-yi that he had discovered him. This showed that this character was no ordinary person. Hu-yi tried to say that he didn't understand what was happening, but Ha-beek wasn't going to let things slide so easily. He pulled out the stone with blood on it and said that Hu-yi was the son of a mortal mother and a divine father, leaving him speechless. At that moment, Mora came over and apologized to director Hu-yi so that he could leave. Ha-beek told Mora to stay with Byriom for safety because he needed to investigate a few things. Only So-ah there didn't know what had just happened. Ha-beek sat down with the others to talk. He told Mora and Byriom what he had discovered. Everyone was stunned by this. If a person like that existed, could he be even more powerful than Ha-beek? Su-rai's foolish words made Mora slap him, but she also blamed Ha-beek. Knowing that he was so powerful and exposing him, especially when he was powerless, was extremely dangerous. But Ha-beek thought that this was the only way to reveal his true face. Moreover, he believed that Du Song's disappearance and the Divine Stone were likely related. This also angered Bai Ryom. After bringing Su Rai and Habik back, he was also furious and created lightning bolts in a clear sky to warn Hu Yi that he was not to be trifled with. Scene change. A little while later, Habik arrived at So A's office to wait for her. It just so happened, she also arrived at work. Seeing Habik, she was very confused because she didn't know why he was there. He gently said that he had a purpose, which was to go home with her after work. Hearing that, So A realized that even gods get sad sometimes, so she took him to the amusement park. Although Habik was a super VIP pro god, he also screamed like any other mortal when riding the roller coaster. After venting their stress, the two of them strolled, talked to each other, and then went home. They didn't know that Hu Yi was watching them from a distance. The next day, to verify whether Hu Yi was as Habik said, Bai Ryom stood above, controlling a car rushing towards him to see how Hu Yi would handle it. But Mu Ra found it too dangerous, so she intervened and steered the car at the last minute. The two looked at each other and then left. It seemed that with this incident, Hu Yi's calmness was an admission of his identity. Next, having been informed of what happened by Mu Ra, Habik went directly to meet Hu Yi to investigate. There, he discovered something in Hu Yi's chest. Without hesitation, Habik directly ripped off his opponent's clothes. Sure enough, there was a bright spot of fire on him. Habik asked Hu Yi why this mark was on him. There was no reason for a demigod to have it. At this time, the two were arguing fiercely, making Hu Yi want to teach Habik a lesson. Then Mu Ra appeared. She used her superpowers to pull Habik back behind her, then told him to go away and let her handle it. But because of the loud noise, the blind girl had come to see what was happening. Seeing this, Hu Yi went over to comfort her and let them go. Later, dressed in a very flashy outfit, Habik arrived to pick up So A as promised. But from this side of the road, he suddenly looked across the street and saw So A looking at something. He quickly ran over to see. The next morning, Habik went to So A's workplace. As he got out of the car, he discovered the coordinate map on her pen. He panicked and rushed over to her. The coordinates of the stone gods were all here. Remembering that day, he had teleported here just as So A was looking at the map, so the coordinates were transferred there. That night, the two followed the coordinates to find the stone gods. Unexpectedly, they met Dong Du there, but he seemed to have lost his memory and didn't know who anyone was. The two immediately took him back. After some deduction, they learned that Dong Du had been struck by lightning, causing him to lose his power and memory. At this time, Mu Ra told So A not to stay there because these were matters of gods. So A was quite angry, so before leaving, she said a few sarcastic remarks that made Mu Ra blush. So A returned home and didn't see Habik waiting for her like before. She sadly thought he might not be home tonight. But as she stepped into the house, Habik had been waiting for her all along. Because he was afraid it would be dangerous for her to return late at night, he had been waiting for So A. Suddenly, with tears in her eyes, she ran over and hugged Hu Yi tightly, who was sitting there dejectedly thinking about himself. He went out to the small flower garden in front of his house to check his power. At that moment, the chairman's daughter passed by and saw everything he had done. After regaining her composure, she went to find Hu Yi to talk, but she actually thought he was using magic. She said, "Don't use that on those beautiful bouquets." As she was about to leave, Hu Yi suddenly hugged her tightly, the power of darkness slowly emanating from his hands. Luckily, Hu Yi controlled it, then let her leave. Suddenly, the hungry ghost emerged from under the table. Back in the divine realm, he and Hu Yi knew each other, so he came to visit him. Seeing him control the power of darkness, he was also somewhat relieved. Hu Yi curiously asked him about the relationship between So A and the gods. The next morning, So A and Habik had breakfast together, then cleaned the house, which hadn't been dusted in billions of years. Exhausted, So A lay down on the floor and called for Habik to lie down with her. Seeing her so relaxed, he lay down too, but suddenly pushed her against the wall. He warned her, "All men in this world are wild wolves, don't say those kinds of inviting words." So A just lay still, not moving. Later, the two went for a bath at a public bathhouse. On their way back, she saw some children playing on the swings the wrong way, so she went in to teach them. As a result, she fell face first. Habik was embarrassed and slipped away first. Scene change. At the filming set where Mogjia was filming, the problem was that every time he was about to eat his tongue, he fainted. Mogjia and Biam left and received a call from Jian. He got out of the car to let Mogjia go first. Over on this side, after reviewing the God's land, Huyi realized something. The gate separating the two realms was opening. He smiled in a sinister way. At that moment, Biam also arrived and hit him with a palm strike. Biam yelled, "He dares to aim for even the God's land." Huyi revealed his true nature, admitting that he was the one who made Deng Du lose his memory. Huyi challenged, "What can you do? Come on then." Biam immediately returned home and told Habik that So-Ah had sold the God's land for money. Habik was furious and said that if too many humans went there, the gods would never descend to the mortal realm again. At that time, humanity could be destroyed. Although Biam was not as smart as Habik and often acted rashly, he didn't forget who he was and what he was doing because of his infatuation with a girl. So-Ah went to find Huyi to discuss the land. She felt that losing 100 million wasn't as scary as Habik losing that land, because he would suffer a greater loss. Seeing that the deal was not going through, Huyi left. As he stepped out of the door, he bumped into Habik. Huyi said that since coming to the mortal realm, his biggest ambition was X. Hearing this, Habik became jealous and said, "Don't touch my beauty." So-Ah was extremely sad. At this moment, Habik came over. He was angry because he had said before that So-Ah could do whatever she wanted with her land, but not anything that involved Huyi. So-Ah was upset, because it was her land after all, but because she was thinking of him, she went to see Huyi to ask again. Seeing her like this, Habik couldn't hold back and pulled So-Ah towards him and kissed her. At that moment, Mu-Ra called to report that Ju-Dong had woken up. So-Ah and Habik went to see Ju-Dong. She said that if they found the Godstones, they should show her, even though both of them knew in their hearts that fate would keep them apart. Then Habik asked Ju-Dong how he got here, but he wasn't sure, because when he woke up, he found himself in the hospital, then wandered to this place. Ju-Dong took out a Godstone, and now they had 3. Although they were close to the day they would return to the divine realm, Habik didn't feel happy. The next morning, Habik came to the front door of So-Ah's house, just as she opened the door, but she seemed to avoid him and left immediately. At work, thinking about Habik's imminent departure, So-Ah felt sad. At this time, Huyi called and asked to meet her. He said that he had cancelled the contract to help her, and suggested that So-Ah come to work as a specialist to help employees adjust their pressure once a week, while also helping him treat his insomnia. The money would be paid and transferred to her account. In a different development, Yaja was still curious about Huyi. She inquired with Huyi's assistant, and at that moment, she saw Huyi walking with So-Ah. When she learned that the contract for block war in Kangwon had been cancelled, Yaja couldn't believe that Huyi would do that just because of So-Ah. She went to see her grandfather and told him about it, which surprised the chairman, who couldn't understand why So-Ah wouldn't sell even at such a high price. When So-Ah returned, Yaja was already waiting for her on the couch. She began to rant about the reasons why she hated So-Ah. Meanwhile, Yomi walked in and noticed something was wrong with Yaja. She commented that something was clinging to Yaja's head and under her feet, which made her panic and run away in a cloud of dust. Yomi realized that So-Ah wasn't happy today, so she asked her what was wrong and learned that So-Ah was facing a difficult problem with no solution. Back home, Habik was waiting outside for So-Ah. At this point, So-Ah had an answer and decided to stop everything right there. She wanted to paint a beautiful ending for both of them. The next morning, before going to work, So-Ah told Habik to go buy rice cakes to make a farewell party for Ju-Dong. Ju-Dong realized that this girl was the one he loved, and he felt that this was truly a tragedy. In another development, Huyi went down to the parking garage and was attacked repeatedly by a mysterious person. That person was none other than Biam. Huyi became angry, emanating black energy from his body and advancing towards the two of them. As he was about to strike, a beggar emerged from nowhere and stood to block him, allowing Biam and the other person to escape. At the same time, Biam called and threatened Huyi, saying that if he dared to touch humans again, the next time wouldn't be so simple. Scene change. Mu-Ra angrily went to Biam to scold him for his actions, but Biam just smiled lightly, knowing that she was worried about Habik and So-Ah. Mu-Ra felt uneasy because she was afraid that Habik's heart would only be for So-Ah, and if she lost him this time, it would be forever. Byriom said that he had many ways to do things, but he didn't understand why So-Ah's presence made Mu-Ra so worried. In another development, Habik was walking down the street when he met an old man pulling a cart of scrap metal. Initially, he was going to continue, but after thinking it over, he turned back to help the old man. After delivering the cart to its destination, the old man took out a few bills and gave them to Habik, saying it was payment and advising him to live his life to the fullest, as he was sure he would find good fortune. On his way back, Habik used that money to buy 2 mugs, because he remembered that So-Ah's mug had chipped. However, with the little money he had, he didn't have enough, so he modeled for a coffee shop to earn some extra money. After the shoot was finished, he happily embraced his 2 new mugs and made a date with So-Ah. When he met So-Ah, Habik took out the 2 mugs, which surprised her. He pointed to the pink mug, saying it was for the servant her, and the blue mug was for the master him. So-Ah couldn't help but laugh at Habik's cuteness. He boasted that he had done 2 jobs today, picking up trash and modeling, and even took photos as proof to show her. That night, So-Ah went to the place where Huyi had made the appointment. At this time, Huyi was sitting there drinking and thinking about Biam's threats, so much so that he didn't notice that he had a date with So-Ah. Only when someone reminded him did he call back and say he would be right there. Habik, seeing that So-Ah hadn't come home yet, called her, but she said she was busy and hung up immediately. When Huyi arrived at the meeting place, completely drunk, So-Ah discovered that he had a fever. She took off her jacket to cover him and put a warm towel on his forehead. As she was about to unbutton his tie so he could be more comfortable, Huyi suddenly had a nightmare, jumped up and pushed So-Ah down into the chair. Hearing her call him director, Huyi woke up and stopped. At that moment, Habik burst in and angrily punched Huyi for daring to touch So-Ah. But seeing So-Ah scolding him for using violence, Habik got angry, thinking that he had been hindering the feelings between the 2 of them, and that was why she was upset. However, So-Ah didn't explain, only saying that they weren't anything to each other, which made Habik feel like his heart was being rubbed with salt. So-Ah left in the rain and went to Yomi's place to ask for a place to stay for the night. Meanwhile, Huyi dreamed of the things he had done in the past, waking up in a panic. The hungry ghost visited Huyi, reminding him of things he had forgotten over the years, but recently everything was becoming clear again. The next morning, So-Ah was just waking up when she saw Habik waiting for her downstairs. He scolded her for leaving without paying attention to him, not locking the door. But actually, that was just an excuse to meet her, because those locks couldn't stop him. Habik had spent the whole night thinking about the question, "What are you to each other?" and now he had an answer. He said that she was the person he wanted to be happy with, wanted to love and be justifiably jealous of, and wanted to start over. However, So-Ah refused his offer. In another development, Mu-Ra decided to follow Biam, but he treated her like a mouse, wandering around all day. This drove her crazy when she heard Biam say that he wanted Huyi to disappear from this world. Mu-Ra immediately called her assistant and cancelled her entire schedule to continue following Biam. Habik sat in his quiet room, thinking about So-Ah's refusal. He could only hold his face and cry. This was the first time in his 2,800 years of life that he had been rejected by a girl, and that girl was immortal, which made him feel extremely confused and disappointed. This was worthy of being recorded in his history, an unforgettable event. That night, Biam asked Habik out, saying he would teach him how to live a little more recklessly, because he saw that he was too serious about everything. Biam couldn't believe that So-Ah could make Habik so mad, something none of them had ever been able to do. He talked about when he was 20 years old, when he liked to wear shorts to show off his long legs and get a lot of attention from admirers. Biam also couldn't forget the story of So-Ah refusing the diamond ring. She said that if she accepted it, she would feel like she had to pay a high price, which made her unhappy at all. Habik was upset, drinking the whole bottle of liquor, while Biam didn't forget to film this moment for memory's sake. While they were chatting, some thugs saw Habik standing there talking to himself, so they went to start a fight. Seeing this, Biam couldn't hold back, immediately jumping in and quickly and efficiently delivering a few kicks. Then Biam took Habik to So-Ah's house and returned him to her. He said a few things that made So-Ah confused. but she still took responsibility for bringing Habik inside. With great difficulty, she got him inside. She didn't expect Habik to fall on top of her. He gently told her not to worry, he wouldn't do anything. That made her feel relieved, even though the situation was truly strange. The next morning, So-Ah woke up and found herself in bed. Habik didn't mention anything about the night before, and they started their new day as usual. While So-Ah was cleaning, Habik helped her read the book she hadn't had time to look at. But when he read to a certain part, So-Ah suddenly stopped, because the content of the book seemed to be telling the story of the two of them. She told him to stop, claiming that it was time for dinner, but actually her eyes were red and swollen from emotion. During dinner, Habik suddenly asked So-Ah why she liked to wear short skirts and show her legs like that. There were also rumors that she was ambiguous with many men. So-Ah didn't hesitate to reply, asking Habik back that with 2,800 years of living, he certainly wouldn't be lacking in ambiguous relationships. She even sarcastically told him that her ex-boyfriend also liked to drink Americano as a way to irritate him. Habik, not wanting to be outdone, said he could help her make a wish and asked her to write it down. As their conversation continued, Su-Rai returned, seeing the glass of water Habik had bought for So-Ah, and he became angry, refusing to eat dinner. Habik brought him food, but Su-Rai ignored it and left immediately. Afterwards, So-Ah took Habik to the supermarket to buy ingredients for kimbap. As it turned out, Habik's kimbap was beautifully rolled, while So-Ah's was messy and torn. She laughed and said it was okay even if it was torn, because it was still edible. At this point, Byum called Mura and told her about Habik making kimbap and getting ready to go to the beach. When Mura took Byum's phone to look, she saw that Habik was heartbroken and had decided to stay in the human world. Anger surged through Mura, and she immediately left. Mura went to So-Ah's place and wanted to tell her the reason why her ancestor became the god's servant. She dragged So-Ah away before Habik could react. The story went back 1,200 years. The king had planted the idea of eternal life into the mind of Habik's woman. As a result, she eventually betrayed Habik. When they reached the boundary where the woman was being held captive, she said that the Water Queen wanted to kill her and use her blood to break the curse. When she died, she would get to enjoy the so-called eternal life without any resurrection. She begged him to save her, but Habik couldn't forgive her. The drums beat, and she was taken away. Afterwards, the Water Queen used magic to make her bury herself at the bottom of the sea. But her wrath wasn't satisfied, so her brother and his child had to bear the punishment. However, that man used his own descendants to keep his promise to the gods, and they were the ancestors of So-Ah. However, So-Ah felt that even if her ancestors were like that, it had nothing to do with her, because she hadn't done anything wrong. She didn't feel guilty about that ridiculous legend either. Just as So-Ah was returning, Habik had a serious expression on his face. But her attitude remained the same, unchanged. She found it ridiculous that the sins of her ancestors from 1,200 years ago were being blamed on her. If it had been 120 years, she might have listened. But what she really wanted to say was to tell Habik to return to where he belonged and leave her house quickly. So-Ah mentioned the girl Habik used to love. When she was in trouble, it was said he didn't do anything, but Habik didn't say anything and just left. Previously, MG had advised her to let him go, because the Water Kingdom was also Habik. Whatever happened, he was bound to return. She begged her not to become an obstacle to Habik like Nabin, the girl from the past. The next morning, Habik came to console Su-Rai, saying he knew everything he had done, riding the pedal boat under the scorching sun, waiting for customers, and going out for food late at night, even though he got bitten by mosquitoes, just to feed his older brother and have breakfast together. At this point, Habik took out his phone, told her to handle it herself, and then told her not to eat instant noodles, and even if she couldn't cook well, she had to eat rice. He also reminded her to clean diligently. When the light bulb was broken, she could also file a complaint. Before that, he had said he was her god, so he would protect her, but now he felt embarrassed. So-Ah wanted to see Habik off, but he said there was no need, and that they should say goodbye right there. He then left. Habik took a last look at the place, then disappeared behind the gate. In the following days, So-Ah returned to her normal life. At this time, Yomi came to her and asked about her blind date arranged by Jaewon. When she confirmed that it was true, Yomi couldn't believe it. Although she wanted So-ah to break up with Habik, it wouldn't be okay if she continued like this. At this time, Hui came to So-ah's place to examine her. He felt uncomfortable with people who constantly criticized and brought up his past. So-ah advised that no one had the right to choose their birth date or their life afterwards. Jose invited her to dinner and kept pestering her, so So-ah could only reluctantly agree. They had dinner together, talked, and decided to become friends. Biam and Moa witnessed this scene. On their way back, she saw a teddy bear and thought of Habik. Hui thought she liked it, so he asked to buy it to commemorate their friendship, but So-ah cut him off. On the way home, Habik's shadow was no longer there, waiting for her. Every corner of the house had his presence, making So-ah unable to hold back her tears. At work, when So-ah felt tired, a familiar figure appeared before her. He said he had dumped her, but her current state was pathetic, as if she were the one who had been dumped. Then, that figure suddenly disappeared. It turned out it was all an illusion. At this time, John Jin dreamed of So-ah, drenched in water, walking in, followed by the legs of a man, and then woke up startled. When So-ah came, he immediately checked her fortune, because he had been dreaming about her lately. Just then, some people came to make a fuss, so they quickly ran downstairs. It turned out they came because of the rent and demanded that they leave. At that moment, Ma Bong-john stepped forward and told them to put everything back in its place, then rushed forward and kicked each of them. Finally, they were locked up in the police station. Everything became chaotic until Hui came running. After taking everyone out, Hui offered to take So-ah home, but she declined. So, he called to talk and walked behind her, chatting with her. As they entered the alley, a familiar figure appeared, causing So-ah to be stunned. She quickly ran to him and hugged him tightly, hoping this wasn't a dream. When Hui arrived, seeing the two hugging, he sadly retreated. When So-ah entered the house, Su-rai was very touched to see her again. So-ah asked Su-rai why they had returned to the human world. The fat guy told her that the high priest's assistant came to report that the water god had to return to the human world to perform a mission, which was to find the meaning of why the stone god was placed in the human world. When So-ah went to see Habik, she asked if he had returned to do a mission. He didn't say anything but hugged her tightly. Actually, he came to see if she was doing okay, but he still had to return to the god realm, and this would be considered a farewell. The next morning, when So-ah woke up, she hurried to Habik's room, but found no one there. At first, she thought what happened yesterday was just a dream, but when she saw the two guys in the yard, she was overjoyed. After a while, it was time for Su-rai to go to work, but So-ah was off today because something had happened at her office. She was going to stay home and enjoy the money Habik had made, but unfortunately, this time he didn't have any divine power when he came to the human world. Because before he came here, the high priest had asked him to leave his power behind, but he could still bring one special thing of his choice. So-ah was really hoping that special thing was a wish-granting staff or something similar. But the truth hit her so hard, she was stunned. That special thing was the ID cards of the two guys in the human world. This made Habik very happy because he could now drive a car carefree. As for Mu-ra, she was practicing her lines when Rum came over to make a move. He didn't want to see her practice alone and wanted to practice with her. After saying that, he pulled Mu-ra closer and kissed her repeatedly. Mu-ra was very angry and wanted to hit him but couldn't. Later, when Habik learned that So-ah had returned the car, he was quite angry. He had gone through so much trouble to bring his ID card here, but she didn't leave the car for him to drive. So, Habik immediately went to find Mu-ra to tell her about his new mission and give her the car to drive. This was a new rule, and there was no arguing. After that, Hui and Biam went to a coffee shop to talk. It was unclear what they were talking about, but they were quite tense, and it was related to Mu-ra's feelings. Just as Biam was leaving, So-ah arrived. Biam continued to threaten So-ah, warning her not to cause trouble and make his Mu-ra angry. When that happened, he would show her what a real festival was like. When So-ah and Hui were on their way back, they encountered the starving ghost again. He wanted to rush forward and kiss Habik to break his curse. But this time, Habik was awake and handsome, so he didn't give him the opportunity. However, to help the ghost break the curse that he himself had placed, Habik agreed to let him have his way. But seeing two men kissing, So-ah couldn't stand it and stopped them. So, the curse wasn't broken, and Habik still had to hug the starving ghost's empty stomach. After that, Habik had lost all his divine power, so he told Huyi the great news. Huyi often stayed in the human world, and if he lost his divine power, Habik would just be like an ordinary person. At this time, Mu-Ra also came to find Huyi. She agreed to side with Huyi to help him win So-Ah over. However, Huyi refused. He would do everything himself because in this human world, he was the strongest. At the same time, Biam went to find Mu-Ra. Seeing the two talking, he was very angry. He rushed forward and punched Huyi, warning him not to repeat this again. When they went outside, Mu-Ra asked Biam, "Are you afraid of Huyi's destructive power like the story from the past that they heard?" Biam angrily asked Mu-Ra back, "Why do you keep dragging that bastard into the story to use his hand to solve things?" The scene shifted to the next day, when Su-Rai, having obtained his ID card, went to find Yomi to apply for a job. When she learned that the two gods had returned, Yomi went to find So-Ah and asked her if she was okay with Habik leaving one day. As a good friend, Yomi only wanted So-Ah to live a happy life. The two girls hugged each other for support and encouragement. The next morning, So-Ah arrived at the office, and her colleague told her that the office had been bought by someone. Furthermore, the investor really wanted the two of them to continue working there. Afterwards, So-Ah went to Huyi's place to do some extra work. At this time, Biam also appeared there. Seeing the two together, he went over to cause trouble. He grabbed Huyi by the collar and began to fight. Joa wanted to stop him but was pushed down. But when she looked back, the two men were gone. They had teleported outside to have a one-on-one battle. Huyi wanted to know why the idiot kept trying to pick a fight with him. Biam told him that Huyi had done a lot of things in the past that even he couldn't remember. Huyi asked if it was because Biam was afraid of his power that he told him to give up his divine power. So, Biam immediately used his divine power to knock Huyi away. Huyi didn't hesitate to use his divine power to attack Biam. At this time, Jin rushed out to block the fatal blow. Seeing Jin like that, he recalled a scene from the past where he had killed someone in exactly the same way. As Huyi began to feel confused, Habik and Mu-Ra also arrived at the scene. Biam said he wanted to leave Huyi to wait in the cave from the past. Then he was about to punch him. Habik stopped him, saying it was enough, and Biam finally left. Huyi then remembered everything from 1200 years ago. Because he had killed people, his conscience was greatly tormented. As soon as he got home, he blamed So-Ah. Why was she with Huyi? He was very jealous that his woman was walking beside another man. The next day, Habik went to see Biam and asked him about what happened in the cave that year, if Biam had met the girl he loved. At this point, the truth was revealed. At that time, Biam and Jin's twin brother went to the cave to capture the woman and also discovered a little boy there. That little boy was the current Huyi. A group of people claiming to be from the Heavenly King's faction came to capture Nabin. The little boy's power erupted, turning those people into dust. Unfortunately, Jin's brother was among them. At this time, Mu-Ra and Jelzin also arrived. Jelzin said that what happened wasn't Habik's fault, but seeing Habik so stubborn, Mu-Ra slapped him and said, "Yes, it was your fault." Mu-Ra chased after Biam to comfort him. Seeing that her words had no effect, she gave him a kiss to soothe him. Feeling that wasn't enough, the two continued to exchange kisses and tongues. At So-Ah's house, as she was about to go out, Habik returned. He hugged her tightly and apologized for questioning her the previous day. He was very confused at the moment, but when So-Ah comforted him, he felt better. Seeing that he was hungry, So-Ah went out to buy groceries and cooked curry for Habik to eat. Unfortunately for her, she was kidnapped by the beggar god Jin. When Habik went outside to wait, he only found So-Ah's things scattered around but didn't see her. Jin kidnapped her and took her to a deserted farm, but he didn't have bad intentions. He just wanted her to comfort Huyi, who was sitting alone in a corner, distraught. Huyi's mental state was not stable, so So-Ah used psychology to comfort him. After a while, she called Habik and told him she was safe and by Huyi's side. Habik asked her to return immediately, but given Huyi's current state, So-Ah couldn't bear to leave him alone, so she refused. Next, So-Ah used her mind control technique to help Huyi understand that whether he was human or a god, he still had to be a better person. She saw that he was suited to being human and a good person. At this time, Habik also found the farm and took So-Ah away. In the car, So-Ah explained that she did this because she was Hu Yi's psychologist. Habik held her hand as a sign of forgiveness and had no intention of blaming her. As soon as they got home, the god rushed in and kissed So-Ah repeatedly, making her think she was going to get ABC today. However, Habik stopped at just kissing her lips and wanted to save that for another day, which made So-Ah disappointed. It was truly bizarre how the gods played. The next morning, Habik woke up early and did some push-ups to keep himself fit, while So-Ah's mind was still filled with the image of their kiss. Last night, So-Ah was very flustered when she saw Habik walk downstairs, drenched in water. He went inside and asked to use her bathroom because he didn't like taking showers in the open air anymore. So-Ah received a thank you message from Hu Yi, because the encouraging words yesterday had made him feel more upbeat. So-Ah went to the clinic and started cleaning, because the investor who bought the clinic was going to come to visit soon. She called Habik and asked him to bring her some towels. She then went to buy water to greet the upcoming investor. When Habik arrived to deliver the items, he unexpectedly met Hu Yi there. Just as So-Ah returned from buying water, she learned that the owner who bought the clinic was actually Hu Yi. Habik didn't want to accept this favor, so he returned the keys to Hu Yi and dragged So-Ah away. In the car, So-Ah suggested they go to the beach to watch the sunset. So, the lovebirds went to the beach and watched the sun set together. That night, on their way home, So-Ah asked Habik if marriage customs in the god realm were different from those in the human world. He said that in the god realm, there were no such constraints as in the human world, and a celestial being could have many wives. Hearing this, So-Ah was furious because she thought Habik had married many women up there. That night, the two sat down together. Habik said that Su-Rai wouldn't be coming back tonight, so they would do that together. So-Ah immediately thought of something inappropriate, but the truth was that Habik just wanted to watch a movie. The next morning, when So-Ah woke up, she saw Habik had prepared a lot of food. This breakfast was even more lavish than dinner. Sitting at the table, looking at the mountain of food Habik had prepared for her, So-Ah was moved. As they were about to eat, the doorbell rang. It turned out to be Hu Yi, returning the keys to So-Ah's clinic. As it was breakfast time, So-Ah invited Hu Yi into the house. Habik wanted to subtly shoo Hu Yi away, thinking he would leave if he found it awkward, but he sat down cheekily and said he would leave after eating. Sitting at the table, the atmosphere became strangely tense. Hu Yi praised the food So-Ah made, but Habik objected because he was the one who made it. She didn't even lift a finger. To make Hu Yi give up his feelings for So-Ah, Habik listed many of her shortcomings. She was a terrible cook, and she was a sleepwalker, so he was the one who had to carry her to bed every morning. When he went to take a bath, she even secretly peeked at him. It was outrageous. Hu Yi knew Habik's intention, so he said that the land So-Ah was renting for her clinic was his. This made So-Ah extremely happy. After breakfast, Habik asked So-Ah to bring him 2 cups of hot tea. When he saw the 2 cups, Habik immediately raised his voice and said he wanted his cup, aiming to assert his position. Then, the 2 men sat down and drank tea, teasing each other. One said he had power in the celestial realm, while the other said he had a lot of money. Before leaving, Hu Yi also invited So-Ah to visit his farm the next day. Habik objected, not wanting So-Ah to go, but Hu Yi reminded her of the contract compensation, forcing her to make money quickly to pay it off. That's why she went to the farm. The next day, So-Ah went to Hu Yi's farm to work. Habik was also there to help. When Habik was working, So-Ah suggested that Hu Yi should pay him an amount befitting his status. She shyly mentioned the amount and even requested that the contract violation fee be deducted from it. Hu Yi didn't say anything, just smiled slightly and carried the goods to the field, taking the opportunity to remind Habik that farming was very hard work and not suitable for a god like him. Hu Yi knew So-Ah had feelings for Habik, but he couldn't control his own feelings for her. After work, they went home together and made plans to continue working at the farm the next day. Suddenly, Mu-Ra appeared and gave Habik some crucial news. She presented him with a red summoning card and said the Friday training session was approaching, and Habik was about to return to the god realm. If he stubbornly refused to return, there would be dire consequences. That evening, they had dinner together, but it wasn't as joyful as usual. When Habik left, So couldn't hold back her emotions and ate her dinner with tears in her eyes. The next day, before Habik returned to the god realm, So made a list of things they would do together. First, they would go for a walk. Then they would go to have their portraits drawn. So unexpectedly changed into a wedding dress, making Habik stare at her mesmerized. When he went outside, the other three gods were waiting. Mu-Ra knew what Habik was planning and urged him to stop. Habik wanted to use his last bit of power to return to the god realm and transfer it to so she could save her father. If he did that, he wouldn't be able to return to the god realm to be king and would be destroyed. So overheard the whole thing. She blamed him for being so reckless because she didn't want him to disappear from her memories. She wanted him, Habik, to return to the god realm, and she would leave her father in the river. Afterwards, the couple went to the river to take a final look. Habik suddenly pulled So close and kissed her passionately. Actually, he had transferred all his remaining divine power to So. When the other three gods arrived, it was too late. Dungdu pulled Mu-Ra back because he wanted to let the young couple handle things themselves. Habik wanted So to go down into the river to see her father and bring him up. When So arrived, she saw her father's body at the bottom of the river and was deeply moved. He was currently enveloped and protected by the power of the river. So took her father's hand and brought him up. After burying her father, So promised to bring her mother to his grave. Habik held So in his arms, about to say goodbye. So would let everything return to how it was before. The gods appeared at this time, and Dungdu revealed that he still had the servant's seal. Whoever touched it would be granted one wish. Dungdu gave the seal to So and chanted an incantation. As he was performing the ritual, the high priest suddenly appeared in the human world. It turned out that he had been watching over and helping the young couple all this time. As Dungdu was about to continue the ritual, the high priest stopped him. He told Habik that he wouldn't die because his mission to find the meaning of the quartz god had been completed, so he could return to the god realm freely. As for So she could use that wish to wish for whatever she desired most. She then revealed her wish. She wanted Habik to be by her side and stay with her until she died. Mu-Ra and the other gods didn't want to interrupt, so they left. Before leaving, Habik said goodbye to So, saying he had to return to the Water Kingdom to be king and promised to return to the lower world to fulfill his promise. A long time later, no one knew that Mu-Ra and Biam were together. As for So, she still hadn't found her beloved. That night, on her way home, So encountered a familiar figure waiting for her at the end of the alley. It was none other than Habik, the one she had waited for years, who had now returned. He explained that the process of taking over the throne was very complicated, so he was late and asked her to forgive him. In the end, the two embraced after years of separation and lived happily ever after.